On a recent episode of the Sick Podcast with Tony Marinaro, Habs insider Eric Engels spoke out about the Habs trade plans for Patrik Laine, and it's a bit of a surprising update if you've been following all the things going on in that front, so we have to get into that. Plus, Chris Peters on TSN 690 said that even if Demidov plays a full season in the KHL, he believes some AHL time is coming. We're going to get into a bunch of that and more coming up on this episode of Habs Digest. But before we get into the video, I wanted to thank this video sponsor, NordVPN. If there's one thing the Montreal Canadiens are stacked up on for the future, it is defense. And if you want to add an extra level of defense to your browsing, you need to try NordVPN, the fastest VPN out there today.
A VPN, or a virtual private network, encrypts your IP address so that when you're on a public network, that you can create your own private network within that, so you can enjoy the fun stuff on the internet like hockey.
Do you want to watch Habs Digest or a Habs game on the go securely and without an interruption? NordVPN has your back, and if you use code HABS, go to nordvpn.com/Habs, you get an exclusive discount to start browsing online with your VPN today.
But it's not just about speed, as David Savard has showed us time after time. NordVPN has you covered with their Threat Protection Pro. Think of it as your own personal Arber Xhekaj for your computer. Just as he protects the front of the net, we are keeping your system completely safe so you can really have fun while you're surfing the web.
So why wait? Elevate your game just like the Habs with NordVPN today. And if you go to nordvpn.com/Habs, you get an exclusive discount code, and it's 30 days money back guarantee, 24/7 support. They have other features like kill switch to kill your internet connection if your VPN ever drops unexpectedly, and it can be used on any device. So if you never wanted to miss an episode of Habs Digest, you never want to miss another Slafkovsky goal, Suzuki assist, Montembeault save, anything like that, go to nordvpn.com/Habs today and get your discount. Thank you very much to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. So Jesse, I wanted to start first though with something from The Athletic. And they recently did a World Juniors lineup preview for Canada, USA, Finland, and Sweden. And our boy PAatos made the Team Finland roster. So let's take a look what they have for Team Finland. Now, you might as well call this Team Minnesota Wild with all the players they have. They're the first pairing defenseman, Kirby. Steal of the draft outside of Demidov, if you ask me. Again, I have a habit of making this a Minnesota Wild show sometimes. But you see right there, third line center, PAatos Koivu. And Jesse, I think that's pretty good when you consider where PAatos was drafted. Again, at the time when he was drafted, it was seen as a bit of a reach. But to see now where he slots in on line 3 for Team Finland, I think there's some room for him to move up as well if he keeps impressing. Because as we've heard from a lot of people who have watched his game, this is a player that has improved so drastically from one year to the next. This is a player that is not the same player that we've seen before. And I'm very excited to see what he can do for Team Finland.
Yeah, selected in the third round, and the Habs are looking to make the most out of that pick because you can get some diamonds in the rough just right there in that third round, right? And this is amazing news for PAatos Koivu as well as the Montreal Canadiens, right? Because we want our young players playing against the best in the world in their age groups, right? And a lot of the time, like 18-year-olds like PAatos, like don't really figure big into these lineups. So this is an amazing accomplishment for him. And he's looking to really put in the work to kind of continue to slowly kind of jump up that depth chart, right? There's starting to be slowly a little bit of buzz around him, more and more so as he just continues to play good hockey, right? The big thing about him is just having more maturity in his game and just having those consistent efforts night in, night out. We know about the shot. It's just about putting that attention in the other areas of his game as well, just to really round everything out. And I fully expect that from this young man.
And that's the thing, like, the Habs have, their last Finnish prospect, Oliver Kapanen, or at least one of their other ones, has shown some real strides. Now, it took him a couple years to get there, and it wouldn't surprise me if it also took PAatos a little while to kind of get going, especially as he's getting bigger, adding more muscle. This kind of thing can really change how you play when your body's not behaving the way you've been used to it behaving your whole life, right? And he's going to have to put on a little bit of muscle. This guy was pretty skinny before the draft, but he's already done a bit of that. But regardless, this World Junior Tournament, Jesse, I think is going to be a big indicator for what's to come for PAatos Koivu, even if it's just to give us a little bit of insight as to where he is in his progression. Again, a long way to go in the future, not expecting him to make any huge jumps anytime soon, but it's really exciting to see that not only us, but people at The Athletic seem to have fairly high hopes for him, at least so far. But I wanted to get into something else here. I wanted to talk a bit about Demidov's development, and A lot of people were saying, as soon as he comes over to North America, he's going to go straight to the NHL. We saw it with Juraj Slafkovsky. First season, there he is. He's playing in the NHL. We're not sending him down. Unfortunately, he got hurt. Second season, right back. We did see a bit of an AHL stint from Caufield, but that scenario was a little bit different as well. He still started in the NHL, played in the playoffs. But recently on TSN 690, Chris Peters was on, and he had some interesting comments. I'm going to bring these up here. First thing he said is, let's say Demidov does not make the roster, so St. Petersburg's KHL team for next year, and he ends up in the MHL for the season. Then all of a sudden, we're all talking that he probably needs at least a full year in the AHL after that. He goes on to say that I think even if he plays in the KHL, there's still potential that he's going to have to spend some time in Laval, because there's no doubt that he's exciting, but he also has to get the reps. And while I get where he's coming from, I definitely agree that getting reps is going to be important. But I think Montreal's roster has been constructed in such a way that they're designing it to have a space for him as soon as he's ready. They have not been shy about playing their young guys early, and I know in the past that has cost them. But I think the past is the past. We've seen a guy like Guhle come in quite young relative to defensemen his age. Even a guy like Barron, still not super young, but there's a lot of young guys, right? Even teenagers or just 20-year-olds who are starting to play a lot of minutes for the Montreal Canadiens, and it has helped them so far. They did it with Slav, Jesse. Do you think they would do anything different for Demidov? I don't entirely hate this take. I'm not crapping on Chris Peters' opinion, but just to me, based on what we've seen, I don't see a world where he doesn't start in the NHL and stay in the NHL as long as he doesn't have a really bad stretch.
Yeah, Ivan Demidov's going to come to training camp next year for the Montreal Canadiens, not this one coming up the year after, and absolutely blow everybody away and make this team, Josh. And it's a solid point that you make that in this roster construction, they're very much keeping a spot available for him. It's a reason why they didn't do other moves at the draft once they knew that they had this player. So they're absolutely going to be keeping that spot. It's definitely contingent on how this year goes in the KHL, but I fully expect him to get the minutes and as a result, get the experience he needs. That's the one big thing, right? Kent Hughes really believes as well that he only really needs 1 year in the KHL before ready to come over. Of course, it's still a fluid situation, but I think the reason that Kent feels that way, that you and I feel this way, Josh, is even though Ivan Demidov was selected 5th overall, for me, he's more of a number 2 overall type of player, right? Just absolutely dynamic. There is a solid point, though, that Chris Peters said. I think it would be helpful for me to bring up, though, is that Nikita Kucherov did play 17 games in the AHL, coming over from Russia before jumping into the NHL. Not a huge sample size, or anything else, just 17 games, but it did help him. There's a solid argument just to say, okay, yeah, let's just do whatever they did for Nikita Kucherov. That works. That's good enough, because that's the template that we're going for this type of player. That's the type of player that we want with Ivan Demidov, or even better, right? So obviously, I think that there's, it's going to be very much dependent on the season, on how it goes. But just judging on how there's such a good connection there with SKA, it seems like he's going to get the minutes. And as a result, he's going to be ready to play in the NHL once he comes over.
Yeah, I believe it. And realistically, a lot of Russian draft picks, a lot of the highly touted Russians we've talked about before, whether it's Kucherov, whether it's Kaprizov, whether it's Panarin, there's so many guys. A lot of them have played in even the MHL for small stints, but still split usually between the KHL and MHL in their draft +1. And a lot of these guys end up fine. Now, again, they don't really make that jump directly to North America, but we're seeing it a bit more and more and more with a lot of Russian prospects kind of coming over now. And the KHL, at this point, I don't know what their league strength is relative to the AHL. Obviously, KHL used to be just a bit below the NHL. These days, maybe a little worse. I don't know if it's quite AHL level, but regardless, it's a pro league with grown men. Some of the most talented players in the world are there. So no matter what happens, I think 1 full year over in Russia is going to be fine for Demidov. I get the point. We'll have to see how he does when he comes over next year, Jesse. But like you said, I think he's going to dominate training camp and force himself into the lineup for the Habs. Let's get into the final topic of the video. I wanted to talk about this Patrik Laine thing. Now, this came a couple days ago from Eric Engels on the Sick podcast with Tony Marinaro. And a lot of people are talking about Laine, and Eric Engels was saying, he's on Twitter, he sees all the stuff pushed to him in the For You feature. He's seeing people say, the Habs are a front runner for Laine. We're seeing it on YouTube. We're seeing it everywhere. We talk about it all the time. But there's never been anything really concrete. But Eric Engels, well, he's one of the most tuned in guys for the Habs, and he had some interesting comments, so I'm just going to bring them up. We'll start with this one. He I was asked by Tony Marinaro what the interest is. He said, I'd say it's very minimal. I've obviously poked around on this. I'm sitting back and laughing when he's talking about looking at these Twitter rumors of saying Laine is going to Montreal, they're a front runner. He goes on to say, let's be real on this situation. Laine is on the market for a reason. Montreal feel that they have an extremely healthy room, and whether or not they'd want to incorporate somebody like him and what he's coming with at this juncture of their development is a question. And he ends it off, Jesse, kind of an arrow to my heart, because I've really been on this Laine train. I really think it's a real long shot. If the Canadiens are able to take on Laine and get an asset with him, maybe this becomes something that down the line could happen, but I think it's highly unlikely. And it's a little sad. Ken Hughes, we know he's been cooking. We know he's been in the office doing everything he can do. It makes sense. If, you're going with the logic, it makes sense. But to hear the interest is minimal, I guess is a little bit surprising. But on that same note, Jesse, if he's done poking around in the Habs organization, we know Laine's been on the market, and he still hears interest is minimal. Sounds to me like this is just speculation, but it sounds to me like Kent and Jeff have no real interest, maybe from a chemistry standpoint or on the standpoint of how much Columbus would be asking for him.
The rumors still continue, however, which makes this report a little bit confusing all the same. Josh, I'm going to stand by my take of that 40% chance of this trade happening. I still think that there's a solid possibility that this ends up coming to fruition for the Habs. One factor, though, of this trade that I haven't heard talked about anywhere else is the thing with Kent Hughes, right? The man of the hour when it comes to this trade is making this trade. Do you feel like there would be more pressure now on the Montreal Canadiens to be better right away? Because if you're adding a player like Patrik Laine, I think right away there's more pressure on this young team to become better. Right. And it's if you're Kent Hughes, are you okay with that on having a little bit more pressure right away for your team to win? Or do you kind of want to wait and plan your attack a little bit more? Right. The timing on this is all very important. They know when they want to compete. They don't want to kind of go in half foot. Right. When they go to compete, they want to make it clear to everybody, really knock down, the barn doors and let everybody know that they're really there to challenge for a playoff spot and furthermore, right? So that's a big thing when we're all evaluating the situation. It's a solid point that Eric Engels brings up that he's not bringing a complete game to the table, which we know the Montreal Canadiens, they'd like to have their cake and eat it too. They'd like to have that skill, but that character, that attention to detail. We know that Marty's so big on this, but he's been able to help a lot of offensive players with exactly that, rounding out their game, making it so much better, right? So I do believe, though, contrary to Eric Engels, that if any trade was to happen, it wouldn't be to take on the cap, right, to then kind of get rewarded for that. I think it definitely has to be under Nick Suzuki's salary. Absolutely. That's the only way that it makes sense. What also makes this trade so much better, I think if they can involve an Anderson or a Dvorak, you're making that trade right away, right? Because it's, the term is similar where there's just a huge upside with Laine as comparison to an Anderson or Dvorak. So I think if they could be a part of this, that definitely helps the chances of this deal going up considerably.
I mean, if they can do that, I would be cheering for joy. You can get off one of those contracts while taking on a guy that could go out and score 40 goals. I mean, I'd be ecstatic. But again, there's so many ifs, ands, or buts with this, but I like that. I respect that sticking around the 40%. For me, I think my number's starting to go down a bit. I'm starting to say maybe 10%. But then again, Kent Hughes has historically stuck pretty close to the chest, so it's possible that this is very true, and Montreal is just not interested in bringing in Laine, and I think a lot of you fans watching, I know a lot of you, that's right, you, who's about to leave a comment on how much you don't like Laine, I think you're probably pretty happy about this. But for the other people who think it'd be a good idea, which is also a lot of you, maybe it's a little sad, let us know your thoughts on this whole situation. It's still fluid, just like the Demidov situation. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's going to be a lot of updates, I'm sure, as we head into the season until the day that he's traded. But yeah, let us know what you think down below, because that'll do it for this episode of Habs Digest. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Thank you all. We're pushing towards 15,000 subscribers, so if you wanted to help us reach that goal, we'd really appreciate it. I'm Josh Gosse, my co-host, Jesse Poirier. We'll catch you in the next one.